Best song I ever learned. Some of you know this already. It's God Bless the Child by Billie Holiday. So I got to speak her into the room. She taught me a lot and continues to. So this is God Bless for all of you. Them that's got shall have, them that's got shall lose. So the Bible says, and it still is news. 'Cause your mama may have, and your papa he may have. But God gon' bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Well, you see the strong get more, while the weak ones fade. Empty pockets don't, they don't ever make the grade. And your mama may have, and your papa he may have. But God gon' bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Oh, oh, money, you can have lots of friends. They can be crowding round your door. Oh, but when you're gone and all your spending ends, they ain't coming round. They ain't coming around here no more. So rich relations give crusts of bread and such. Go on and help yourself, but don't take too much. 'Cause your mama may have, and your papa may have. But God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. You can have lots of friends. They can be crowding around your door. And but when you're gone and all your spending comes to an end, well, they ain't coming around. They just ain't coming around. No, my soul. Rich relations give crust of bread and such. Go on and help yourself, but don't take too much, 'cause your mama may have, and your papa may have, but God gon' bless the child that's got her own. God gon' bless the child. Yeah. God gon' bless the child. Yeah. God gon' bless the child. Yeah, God gon' bless the child that's got his and her. Oh, them that's got shall have. Little Billie Holiday. Never hurt nobody is what I like to say. All right, all right. I'm glad y'all are having a good time. All right. For the professor. Do ya know ya? Know ya? Do ya know ya? Yeah. Do you know about Sankofa? Do ya know Sankofa? If you don't know, I'll reach back and show ya. Yeah, yeah, do ya? Do ya know ya? Do you know about Sankofa? You better run, you better fly, you better reach high. Pull it from the earth, pull it from the sky. You don't have to know yet. You don't have to ask why, it will show you. If you know about Sankofa, yeah. what you need to do. Tell me, oh, why? Why does it take the time? It takes the time, it takes the time. If you don't know, just ask an elder. They will show you, so you know you. Go back, Sankofa. Oh, yeah, do ya, do ya, do you know ya, do you know ya about Sankofa? You better run, you better fly. Oh, and if you don't know, you don't have to worry. No, no, you've got an elder here to love you. You've got an elder like a field of wild flowers, so fragrant, loving on you, loving on you with teaching, teaching and loving, loving and knowing what you know and don't know. Don't you worry, don't you worry, don't you worry, no, no. Oh, you better run, you better fly. Oh, you don't have to know why. You've got an elder. So many beautiful elders, like a field of flowers, fragrant, knowing, loving on you, teaching on you, teaching on you. Sankofa. You don't have to reach too far back. Oh, they support you, they stand behind you, they lift you. Oh, you better run, you better fly high. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, Sankofa. That was for Dr. Mahmoud El-Khati at his request. And now we'd like to have a selection from the young and amazingly talented Ibrahima on the drums.
Abrima Sard. Thank you. And of course, the lovely Thomasina Petrus and the Trio Band. Wow. I've never been in a space with Thomasina where I've not been transformed. And now I will tell you the real person that we wanted you to hear from first has come back into the room. I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing to you the executive director of In Black Ink, none other than Raquette C. Assar. Welcome.
Oh, you guys are such a beautiful sight. This is awesome. We were talking about how once we kind of come into a space and fill the space with our energy and our faces and our emotions, we're just like, it's like a family reunion. So this is the real Sankofa in terms of us symbolically. Thank you. So thank you guys for coming out. Thank you for braving the weather. Thank you for getting on a plane and flying out here. For those of you who have joined us from other cities, and just really thank you for re-energizing what we know we need to do as a community. I want to say welcome. This is the, what is this? This is the second time In Black Ink is hosting the Sankofa event and series. And this series actually came out of the groundwork of our community elders and the community members who knew that this is something we need to do, not just for ourselves, but for each other. We need to be able to share in conversation, discussions about topics and things that really move us and really mean a lot to our community. And we need to come up with solutions to find ways of building that level of, what do we call it? Confidence and energy that help propel all of us together in a forward movement. And so this is Sankofa. Sankofa series and event is basically an event that started in 2014 with a small group of folks, Elder Mahmoud El Khati, who you know is behind a lot of good trouble all the way across the state. He's always twiddling away, you know, positioning people, kind of playing chess, positioning people where they need to be so that they can actually manifest what they know they're supposed to be doing. Elder Janet Williams was also at the table. She's actually one of the people that inspired and moved folks to really look at this as a forum that we can start and continue, because she was so moved by some piece of work that Elder Mahmoud did, The Myth of Race, and she wanted it to be shared with everybody. And so she was like, we got to do this. And Elder Mahmoud was like, we cannot just do this for me, because it's something that comes out of this community. It comes out of the work that we're doing. It comes out of who we are. And it's not just my words, it's the words from everyone. So we have to build in some form of discussion or some way to include the community in this process. So this is what has been done. But I kind of jumped ahead to talk about Sankofa, which is really not what I was supposed to do. So I apologize. But I'm so excited about the fact that this feels so much like that symbolic experience that I had to share that little snapshot. And then I think I'm gonna have someone else come up and talk a little more about the details of that. But In Black Ink, yay, In Black Ink. We are, again, everything we do comes out of community, comes out of the movement and the experience of our people needing something. What In Black Ink basically is, it's not, a lot of people say it's a publishing company. We're not a publishing company. We're a publishing arts initiative. And we're initiating that publishing arts process. We're saying that our community needs to change the narrative that is told about us. We need to be the voices. We need to be the authors. We need to be the editors. We need to be the layout artists, the desktop publishers, the printers, whoever has a hand in that publishing process where you're moving that thought to paper, to that whole concept of what people think and how they think and see you. So that whole perception that's formed about Black people and people of African descent has not been totally formed by us. It's been co-opted and hijacked, and it has been used as a way to keep us in a certain place. And so one of the things that we really appreciate in this state of Minnesota is that we have people who have voices, who have really looked at the experiences that they've had and said, I want to share that. And we want to honor that. We want to honor their voices by not having an intermediary step in and tell their stories for them. We want them to tell their stories. We don't want to wait until all of our elders have passed on with all of the knowledge and wisdom that they have to say, oh yeah, we really appreciate them. We want them to be present as we talk about who they are, as we share about their experience, as they tell us, hey, you know, when I was 12 years old, I went through the same thing you went through. Because that's how our family, that's how our community is built. So I say all that to say, welcome in Black Ink is an initiative. It's something that actually has stepped in to do some of the work that we need to do to get our people in the publishing process. And in that industry, where only 4% nationwide is guided by people of African descent, and 2% of the publication nationwide is things about us. So we need to really change those numbers. For over 30 years, the publishing industry has been saying that, oh yeah, we need to diversify. Diversity don't start with someone asking you to come into their, you know, the format or the forum that they've created. It starts with you actually saying, this is who I am, and this is how I move, and this is what I look like. And then we come to the table. We don't come and fit into boxes, and we can't do that. We've done that for a long time. We can't continue to do that. It sends the wrong message to our children. It sends the wrong message to the world. So with all that said, thank you, and welcome. I guess I could tell you who's coming up next. He says I don't have to, but I'm gonna do what Elder Mahmoud hates people doing for him, which is introducing him with too long an introduction. But this young man over here, even though he got a lot of gray, this young man is on his best day an awesome human being. He is extremely caring and just really devoted to this community, and really is my right hand and my left hand on most days. So a lot of times when it looks like Sister Raquette is doing all this work, it's Sister Raquette telling Brother Nur to help her do this work. So, and we battle it out sometimes because he's like, I don't want to do it like this. I want to do it like that. And I'm like, well, I'm asking you to help me. So you can't do it like that. You got to do it like this. So this, and he's been able to, through the years, kind of humble himself to be able to do that. And it is a work in progress or process. But I want to introduce Brother Nur because everybody knows him as Brother Nur. He carries his heart on his sleeve. He works when he's sleeping, you know, nonstop work. If you're not working, you can't be around him because he just makes you nervous. So, honey, and he's my husband.
All right, Hotep, everybody. I get to, well, welcome again, everybody. You look beautiful. It's a great environment. You had great food. Robert Taylor, bomb chef. What do you think about the food? Oh my goodness. Yeah. Like to talk about an aspect of the Sankofa series event, and that's the literature portion. Each Sankofa event has a literature piece attached to it. This time we have the topic, the general topic that hasn't been named yet, is Blacks in Media. And so let me just back up for a second. So the first time when we did the Sankofa event, we released Elder Mahmoud's, or re-released Elder Mahmoud's book, The Myth of Race, The Reality of Racism. And then a couple years ago, I think it was a couple years ago, we released another book. It was an anthology of approximately, 12 writers? 11 writers about the topic of education. It was called Towards an African Education. And we had educators and scholars write what they thought would be the best way to educate our people in our community. And so we released that book. And so it takes a couple years to kind of do it. But so for this year, we're have contributors that will be writing on this topic that Dr. Dixon is going to be speaking on tonight. And so, however, it won't be released until next year's Sankofa event. But again, we'll have about 15 contributors to that topic. And these are people, like the publisher of the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, Tracy Williams Dillard, the oldest Black newspaper in Minnesota right now. We have a lot of people in the different areas, whether it's radio, newsprint, internet, you name it, little social media kind of stuff. So you're going to be in for a good treat from these different perspectives and these different people who you actually know from the community. And they're all from Minnesota, and they're all of African heritage. And so just to introduce, and the public, or the editor, our guest editor or contributing editor is Al McFarland. He's the one that's putting it together. Elder Mahmoud, none other than Elder Mahmoud, is going to be doing the forward for the book. And so you're in for a treat. So make sure you put this on the calendar for next year. I don't know exactly what date, but it'll be in the fall sometime. But with that, I'm going to pass it back to our MC. Sister Alyssa, thank you, everybody.
That's part of the wonder of being part of Black culture, that you can have two people who love their Blackness, spread it everywhere they go. So I love being around Sister Raquette and Brother Anura, and I'm delighted to be in the house tonight. My name is Lissa Jones. I hyphenate now. Oh, thank you, beauties. Thank you. I always think it's me and my dad listening to the radio, so I appreciate that double time. I have the gift of being the MC for tonight, and I'm not going to linger long because you didn't come to hear me. We came to hear from Dr. Dixon about Black people in the media. I did a show one time on the Black press, and the opening clip said they didn't even know that we got married or graduated college or went to high school or accomplished anything at all because the white press never talked about it and they never wrote it down. So we need Black people in the spirit of In Black Ink to tell our own stories so that we describe our experiences by ourselves and for ourselves. Tonight, I have the privilege of introducing to you Dr. Travis L. Dixon. He's the professor of communication and the communication alumni professorial scholar from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My gosh, that's a lot. Professor Dixon is a media effects scholar dedicated to investigating the prevalence of stereotypes in the mass media and the impact of stereotypical imagery on audience members. Dr. Dixon serves on the editorial boards of Communication Research, Howard Journal of Communications, Media Psychology, and the Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media. Much of Dr. Dixon's work has been focused on racial stereotyping in television news. His more recent investigations examine the content and the effects of stereotypes and counter-stereotypes in major news events, online news, and musical contexts. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Travis Dixon?
Hotep, everybody. See if I can get my technology working. How's everybody doing tonight? I'm going to talk to you, so at different points, I'm going to be asking you questions, and so I hope that's not a problem. And asking you to chime in at different points. Can't get it to start. This is why I'm a Mac guy. There it is. There we go. All right. Yes. Yes. Okay, let's try this one more time. Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be able to spend some time with you having a discussion about one of my favorite topics, the mass media, racism, stereotyping, and its impact on our society. I want to really thank In Blank Ink for the invitation, Sankofa for having this event. I am honored and humbled to be able to stand before you tonight. This is, I said last night to a smaller group of people that this feels a little bit like coming home. It feels a little bit like I've known you all for the last 20 years. Met many of you tonight, some of you last night, but this reminds me of the power, the ability, and the extent of love and impact of the wider Black community, of which I am a son. And before I get started, obviously, I have to, in that spirit, acknowledge my ancestors, the ones that have me here, including my parents, Clarence and Bernice, grandparents, Clarence Sr., Mary, Ada, and Henry. I would not be here without them. I would not be here without my mentors, those who came before me, every scholar who came before me, all of my scholar mentors, and all of my personal mentors. I am a product of them, and I am grateful for that. And the conversations around the community activism, the involvement, the leadership of the elders reminds me that I am just one more person with the baton, and I'm hoping that I can, it's not really repay is more of a European idea, but if you understand what I'm trying to say, I continue to give because so much has been given to me, which is a little bit more African. Okay, that said, I want to talk a little bit about my journey. And my journey started as really a young man in South Central Los Angeles. If you were around in the 80s and 90s, you might remember some of the tropes and stereotypes about where I grew up. There were a lot of movies made. One of them was Boys in the Hood. I was Trey. And there was, South Central, there were, Juice, and there were just several of these kinds of movies that were made. And what was the interesting thing, one of the interesting things I will tell you from growing up really quick about what life was really like. One of the interesting things, and the reason why I actually like Boys in the Hood better than any of the other movies, it was the only movie presented at that time that presented a diversity of images of what we were like in the community. And if I think about the very block in which I grew up, the very block and the very street in which I grew up, this is not a joke, I'm not exaggerating, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Next door to me was an entrepreneur. He owned his own lawn business. Down the street, a little bit up the ways, was a teacher. She worked in the public high schools. A couple of doors down from her was a police officer, right, who worked there. Now, that's all true. A couple of doors down from him, there was a gangbanger. And then 3 or 4 doors down, there was another guy who sold drugs. The FBI came and took him away one day. And it's a diversity of experience, is my point, right? But there's only one experience out of those several that I talk about that you would see in the media. And so growing up, I was very, very blessed to have extremely amazing parents who taught me morality, pointed me towards God, pointed me towards a lot of other things that changed my life. And actually went to a church at the time where the pastor had a PhD, which was unusual in the 1970s. And I remember I finally had this opportunity. I talked a little bit last night about being a McKenna kid. There was a principal named George McKenna, who was the principal of my high school, George Washington High School. He changed that high school from what was the stereotypical inner city dysfunctional high school into a shining example of what the possibilities can be when someone just said, we got to think about things differently. And about 80 to 90% of us from my class, we went to college. He was so successful. They did make a movie about him. It's not the one with Morgan Freeman and the Lean on Me. That's the other guy. He was more of the Lean on Me, Joe Clark. He was a little bit more of the Malcolm X of the school reform at that time. McKenna was a little bit more of the Martin Luther King Jr. They both wanted to reform. They both had different approaches. But George McKenna was played by Denzel Washington. And as a result, Denzel Washington actually spoke at my high school graduation. It's before he was Denzel, but he was still Denzel, right? You all know the difference. I say all that to say, I worked hard, and I worked my way to school and got to UCLA. Now, UCLA, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is a leading public institution on the West Coast, very well known, internationally known school. And I get there, and I am immediately, because again, I'm all this promise, right? I'm overcome these odds. I'm there. I'm going to do this thing. First day on campus. Now, I'm going to date myself a little bit. For those of you who are like millennials and Ys, you won't really be able to understand. If you're Xers and older, you'll be able to get this. Okay? So I'm sorry that I'm doing this generational thing, but it's an important part of the story. Okay. They had something called an orientation. Orientation works like this. You show up over the summertime, you go to the dorm, you stay in a dorm, and the whole point is that they want to get you familiar. They taught you the A-clap. It's a very important thing if you go to UCLA that you understand the A-clap. They tell you more about the campus. They show you around, and they have you live in the dorms to kind of get used to what it's like being a student there. But the most important thing that you do while you're there is you register for classes. Now, at that time, I'm not that old. We had computers, okay? All right, they were computers, but they were mainframe computers, all right? And they had terminals, and the way that you enrolled in your classes is you had to have somebody physically input what class you wanted into the terminal. That was extremely important, and that's basically how this operated. Well, let's say you chose these 3 classes, and they're the most popular classes on campus, and you had a kind of bad time in terms of when you could register. You could end up with no classes, and then you had to stand in this long line, and there's usually a mean lady you're trying to get into this class, and the lady's like, no, you can't get in this class. You got to get on wait list, with a lot of attitude. Yes, it was usually a sister, and she was usually not trying to help you, right? And so to avoid that, you went to orientation. So I go to orientation. Now, actually, before I get there, let me say this part. I get to my dorm room. Like I said, I'm trying to live like everybody else, get used to this thing. Sit there, I'm on the bed and kind of trying to get acclimated and thinking about what I've accomplished and where I am. And this white gentleman walks in and looks like, oh crap, there's a black man in here, right? That look, this is what's gonna happen. This is not good, right? And freshmen, it's really hard to get into UCLA. Freshmen have these freshman conversations, okay? So freshman conversations at UCLA would be things like, my GPA was 4.5. My GPA was whatever. I have 36 credits. I don't have to even have a freshman year. I have enough credits for sophomore. I've passed all these AP tests. I've done this. I got this SAT score. And everybody was saying this stuff, right? So I'm like, okay, I guess I got to say stuff. So I started saying, well, I got this many credits and I did this and I did that. And there was this really strange look like, you actually did that? Like, are you making that up? You didn't really pass your AP history exam. If you did, you didn't really get a 4. You had to at least got like a 3. No, I got a 4 on my AP history test. I did that. Okay. Oh, it's very weird look. And then I got a question. Now, this is what I want to ask you. I bet somebody can figure out this question. Okay, so constantly, everywhere I went, I was asked this question all the time. What was the question? Did somebody? That's a variation on the question. Absolutely. What's another way of asking that same question? Are you an athlete? Or what sport do you play? And I thought to myself, because let me just tell you, I'm not an athlete, okay? At all, that's not my thing. Nah. Some geek stuff. Yeah, I did that. I did academic decathlon and I did some other things. I actually did cross country for a week and then realized I didn't really want to do that. I'd rather take driver's ed and drive to where I want to go rather than try to actually run. So I did. No, you got the wrong dude. I don't, no, I did. I mean, like I said, I was like Trey. I did have friends who are athletes. You want to talk to Keith? He plays football, and my other friend over here, he played basketball. But no, not. You got the wrong dude for the athlete. But it was really, really weird. So I say that all that to say, immediately I was confronted from my very first day, my very first moments on campus, with somebody else's perception of who I should be. Got worse. Here's where it got worse. You're there, it's camaraderie. There's a counselor. The counselor's there, and he's really being encouraging, and he's telling me all this wonderful stuff about. I mean, all of us, like we can make it at UCLA. And I'm thinking, I'm connecting with this guy. I understand what he wants us to be successful. He's going to be there for us, right? Now, I felt all that until the day it was time to do classes. So here's what happens. I go up, and I say, okay, these are the classes I'm going to take. I still remember the classes. I don't remember any other semester, but I remember this one. I'm going to take math 40, okay? It's probabilistic math. I need to get that knocked out because I hate math, and this one seems like it's okay. I'm going to take linguistics 10 because the other decision I made at that time, the best decision I made was to become a communication major. I thought, I got a presentation on communication during orientation. I thought, this is it. I'm going to do this. That's the major for me. I'll tell you, there's a little side story on that too, but I'm just going to stick with this main one. So I'm like, I'm going to take linguistics 10 for the comm. I'm going to get rid of this math, and I'm going to take freshman English 3. I'm going to take all those 3 of those classes. That's going to be my starting. We did 12 to 16 units at that time. So it's 3 to 4 classes per quarter. I'm going to start off with 3 classes and see how this goes. Okay. So I get there. I show my card of interest to the counselor, right? Now he looks at me and he goes, there's a problem with these classes. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? There's a problem with my classes? I don't understand. Why are you, English 3, okay? That makes sense. I'm a freshman English, I'm a freshman. There's math, that makes sense. It's a GE requirement. I need to do it. In linguistics, not only is it GE, but it helped me get into comm, and that's what I want to do. And I know this is the group of classes. He said, well, you can't take English 3 because, in order to take English 3, you have to pass the subject A test. I did pass the subject A test. What are you talking about? No. You need to take either English A or B. And A or B, if you don't know, there's a kind of pejorative word for it, but they used to call it dumbbell English. Okay? And it's basically for students who are not able to pass you had to either get a certain AP score or you had to pass the subject A exam. And I'd already passed the subject A exam and I'd taken AP English. And so I was ready for English 3. He did not believe me. Now, didn't have phones at that time. Today it'd be like, bam, right? Or he would see it, because it would be on some sort of screen that he could look at, right? But, I was a geek, right? I'm just saying this is what I was and am to this day. And so I went upstairs to my dorm. I had the paperwork, y'all. I had receipts. I brought it down. I said, excuse me, here's my subject A exam that shows I passed. Can you give me my classes, please? He was pissed off. He was angry, right? Like he had gotten caught in his own racism and his own stereotype of me, all right? I, at that time, had to understand and began to formulate a hypothesis. And that's what I want to talk to you about the rest of the day. Okay, here's the hypothesis. And at the time, I didn't know it as that, I wasn't trained or anything. I later went on and got some training, okay, at UCSB. I finished the communication degree. Here's another thing that happened to me constantly my whole time while I was at UCLA. It's hard to get into UCLA. It's one of the hardest schools to get into in the entire country. They have something like 3 to 4, maybe 4,000 spots. Maybe it's a little higher now. But they usually have something in the magnitude of 40 to 80,000 applications a year. It's very, very, very competitive. After you get into UCLA, if you want to be a comm major, you got to apply again, y'all. It's another application process. They only have 100 spots and they have many, many more applicants. So now I'm competing against the best students at UCLA. They've already gotten, they got into UCLA, but now they're the best ones that got into UCLA. And so you have to dang near have a straight 4.0 average to get into the major. It's very, very difficult, very competitive. And so whenever I would tell people, what are you, the same thing, okay, it's part of the same thing, right? What are you gonna major in? Travis, what are you gonna major in? I'm a major in communication. Okay, so when you don't get in, what are you gonna really major in? Would always be the backup question. Sometimes it came from my own people. Like, okay, Travis, okay, yeah. There's no Black people in communication. I mean, there was in fact, at the time, there was, no kidding, there was one Black woman that we knew who she was. And there was a fictional Black man. Like they said, oh, there's some Black man, but no one ever knew who he was. They never find him anywhere. Like, but there's a Black guy. He's in there. There's some Black guy that's in communication. Like really, no one ever knew. So right. So anyway, when I eventually made it. When I was in my comm classes, right, and as I moved forward, I showed up with this hypothesis. Here's a hypothesis: white people live in a segregated society. We do too. But we are forced to integrate more into their thinking and into their world. If we're gonna make it, we're gonna have to learn how to work with them at some level, okay? We use media and other devices that we have to make it successfully in their world. They don't have to work in our world. They have no idea that my Black community, when I said my Black community was diverse, you all were like, yeah, I get that. I get how somebody can be on the right track, doing what they need to do, taking care of their business, and I can get how another person is not doing what they need to do, or they're not on the straight and narrow, they're making some other bad choices. We probably have friends and associates who are in both of those camps. We understand that diversity that exists in our community because we're in that community. White people are not in that community. So where did they get the idea about us? Why were they so confident that I was an athlete? Why was my counselor so confident that I could not have possibly passed freshman English? The answer was the media. The only place where they saw Black people being successful and being at the university was when they were college athletes. The only Black people that they thought went to universities were on affirmative action, which basically meant you're not truly qualified, so there's no way you got good grades and passed AP tests to get to where you needed to go. That was essentially what we were fighting. So I began this idea. I'm like, by the way, pernicious, horrible consequences to those assumptions. Black poverty rates, Black teenage pregnancy, Black incarceration rates, prison to, education to prison pipeline, as we sometimes now call it. Those are all policies that are based in these assumptions and supported by the large majority of white people, because only thing they have is the media, which is saying, well, these Black people are all out of control and they, are criminals and all these other things, and they can't control themselves, and nothing about resources, nothing about institutions, nothing about the racism that we face. The only thing is the media is framing this in a particular way, and I'm going to talk about what framing is momentarily. Okay. Every class I took, every opportunity I had, I was always looking at this hypothesis. I was always like, okay, I think there's an association between what the media is saying, perceptions, and support for various policies. And I continued to ask that question in every class I took. And then they were like, what do you want to do when you leave here? I think I want to go to grad school. So I ended up at this place called UC Santa Barbara. Loved it. Got some really good training. I got there. I went to one school. I'll say it because it's our rival and I don't like them. They're USC. Went to one school, was interviewing, and I got there and they were like, they said, what do you want to study? I said, I want to study media and race. Well, what is there to study with that? Why do you want to look at that? Like, that's nothing. There's nothing for you to do with that topic. Why would you even think about that topic? Was the reaction. And I got to Santa Barbara, and it was very white school, okay? 2% Black, no Black faculty. At the time, 2 women and all white men on the faculty, okay? And so I got there and I'm meeting them, and they said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do media and race. They're like, we have no idea how to do that, but we'll train you and make you a really good scholar, and you can go and do it. And that's how I ended up at Santa Barbara, okay? And had a really great mentor named Dan Lynn. So I began to continue to do that. I did run into one professor who asked me a really weird question one day, though, which was, how did you learn how to talk? Which I thought was weird. I said I learned from my mama and my daddy, like everybody else learned from their parents. But it's like you can't. How do you learn how to speak? You don't speak Ebonics. I don't speak Ebonics around you. Why would I do that? You wouldn't understand what I'm saying. Okay. Oh, and on my way up there, I mean, this is more frequent, right? And we have to be, take it seriously. We got the Jelani Day situation, which is not too far from where I live. But, I was, yelled at by some skinheads on my very first trip up north. So it was a little scary, but I went ahead and took the plunge and finished. Okay. 2 things is what I try to do. Okay. The first thing is I try to document the nature of media representations of race. And I try to do that with something that we call quantitative content analysis. So I am a social scientist by training. After I do that, I try to understand what the impact is of these images on the viewer. And I typically use experiments and surveys to do that. So I'm going to talk about a couple of content analyses. I'm going to make them really accessible for you. Okay, I'm going to take out a lot of the jargony stuff. And if I get jargony, pull me back and raise your hand, and I will go back and make it plain for you. Okay. There's this guy that I listen to on Sirius XM. I don't know if you heard him, called Joe Madison. He calls it "Get it where the ghost can get it." I can do that. Okay, I'll try to do that. Sometimes I go academic. All right, and if I go too academic, let me know. I'll come back. I'll bring it back. All right. Okay. I do want to talk about. I was not going to, but I'm going to talk about these theories because I think that we're going to need to have some context we wish to move forward in terms of discussion. So I'm going to give you some constructs that I worked through to have you think about this as you begin to try to tackle this issue through discussion. First one, it's called cultivation. It says that that media consumption shapes perceptions. I have a question before I keep going, so I won't keep looking over my shoulder. Is this tech guy still here by any chance, or did he leave? Could you grab him? It's not in presentation mode, and I'm looking over to see if it's advancing or not. That's why I'm doing that. So if it's not a big deal. I can keep going. But in case he is, that's cool. That will help. All right. So what happens is we have different perceptions of the world, and our perceptions of the real world become shaped by what we see on that television world over time. That's basically what cultivation says. Right? So the more you watch television and certain kinds of portrayals, the more those distorted portrayals filter into how you think the real world is. So if on television all you see is a lot of black criminals, you think, well, blacks just must be criminals. If on TV, one of the things we see on TV a lot is that women are often victims, you just think women are going to be victimized. That's just how it is. Okay? So that's what cultivation says. The other one is one called Schema Theory, and it basically talks about how our minds work. So one of the things we have to be aware of is our psychology and how our actual minds function is one of the reasons why we have stereotypes. We have various cognitive structures that we use to make sense. When you came in here today, you use schemas to make sense of this room, where you should sit, if you should talk, like there was a great band that was up here. I was loving that music earlier. That was off the chain. I loved it. Right? Great, wasn't it? Now, only the band members got up there and started singing, right? It wasn't like you said, oh, my job is to come up here and to sing, right? That would be a violation of an event schema. You're not here to sing, right? Only the singers were and the performers were to play, right? That's the idea of schemas. So our schemas operate, and it's sometimes functional, but sometimes it's dysfunctional. I'm going to explain how in a moment. The last one is framing, or actually one of the last ones is framing. And with framing, after a while, our thinking about various topics can become racialized. The press is talking about this a lot. Maybe you all have noticed that there was a recent election in Virginia. Can somebody tell me why Terry McAuliffe lost that election? Culture? Framing. What was framed? What was the framing? What I'm not able to do is it's not in presentation mode. It's not showing me anything. So I'm advancing up here, but I'm not seeing it here. What is it? Critical race theory. What is? Yeah, good. So tell me what critical race theory is. What is it? Truth.
Just press the.
This one. But it's see how I
You
can't
got an
see?
animation. That's why.
Oh.
It's advancing one thing at a time.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. All right. Okay. So critical race theory is truth, yes. But why did people not want to support them? What was that? Yes. 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 The framing is an anti-Black framing. It was a way to express anti-Blackness. Okay? That literally is what happened. This issue became framed, or the election became framed as, do you want to have, anti-Blackness and by extension, anti-whiteness. It's actually masquerading as anti-Blackness, but it's really anti-whiteness. It was going on, right? So it's saying, oh, you're really against white people. And so if you're against white people, then that's what CRT is. And therefore, I can't support Terry McCullough because he's all for that. He's all for putting white people down and making them feel bad. That's a framing effect, okay? That whole election became framed in that particular narrative. You can frame a discussion, for instance, in some states, the issue of Obamacare is being framed as some sort of welfare for Black people. Obamacare is about healthcare for everybody, including poor people. But if you frame it in those racial terms, you can get white people to say, we don't want Black people to get things, so no for healthcare expansion, which is why they're trying to do that in the Build Back Better program, right? Where they're trying to do the 12 states that didn't expand. Most of those are southern states that are like, if Black people are gonna get something, we're against it, right? It's being framed in that way. The last one I'm gonna introduce that I hope you can marinate on a little bit is mine. After a while, you're a professor, you can actually use other theories and test them, but after a while, they're like, come up with your own, man. Come on, stop writing. Come up with your own, right? And so mine is the socially mediated stereotyping model. And here's what this one says. It says that new media challenges us to assess effects by relying on notions of selective exposure, accessibility, and social utility, okay? So the centrality of social media is very important. I'm gonna get into that momentarily. All right. I wanna say that the centrality of this is news, and that is an important disseminator of stereotypes. So let me see if I can get this video to play, if it'll be nice to be. It's not playing? Okay. All right, that's all I figured that it wouldn't probably play, but it's playing here, but not over there, so. Is the tech guy gone again? He's gone, isn't he? That's how that works. It's all good. You all I think you all have heard this before. Basically, it's the statement over here on the left. When Mexico sends their best, or sends their people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Now, here's the interesting question that I have for you. I wonder if anybody knows the answer to this. Well, you know Donald Trump said this. When did he say it? When? Yesterday. Feels like you heard it so many times. When pre-election? Yes. Yes. His candidacy. His very first speech was this. He made it clear. It's not playing the video. That's why I was like, it never went into a video of an actual, what you call it, mode. And so I'm not even going to play it. right? His very first
With
candidacy,
multiple-
his very first announcement to announce his candidacy, he's like, look, Mexicans are rapists. And then the very next thing he started talking about was Muslims are terrorists. Again, these are framing effects. Now, here's the thing I will tell you. I'm not going to present this data today, but I'll just give this to you really quick. He wasn't just saying that just to say it. He said that because the news media, prior to the announcement of his candidacy, have been focusing on what issue? Illegal immigration, Latinos who are being accused of committing crime. It had been focusing on who? Terrorists and Muslims as terrorists. And that's what we saw consistently. Sorry. Thank you. Right? We saw that over and over and over again. And all he did was say, oh, this is what's in the media? Okay, this is what we're going to do then. Let me just go ahead and push that narrative out there, right? And get it going. What is it doing? It's playing, but we don't have sound. That's okay. We'll just keep going. I show a lot of videos, y'all, usually. So they said I had to use the IBM today, and I'm a Mac guy through and through. And I was like, okay, we'll see if it works. And IBM never disappoints. It always doesn't work. So here we go. It's all good. All right. So here's what we did in terms of documenting this piece, just so you know, it wasn't something I made up or assumed was the case, right? We started content analyses, a series of them in the early 2000s. What do we find? We used something called intergroup comparisons. The intergroup comparison said that your likelihood to appear in a role can be measured based upon two groups, right? So is it a Black person more likely to appear in a role or a white person more likely to appear in a role? And if you look at criminality, right, the news media strongly associates Blacks rather than whites with law breaking. In fact, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. For every white person you see committing a crime, there are 2 Black people who are portrayed as criminals in the news. And a role comparison is another thing we did. Maybe, the news can balance this out, right? Maybe for every perpetrator, you might see some, police officers, right? Assuming that these are 2 mutually exclusive things, right? So somebody's committing crime and somebody's the law, the law defender. Well, that doesn't quite work either, right? So just looking at Black people, looking at what roles they show up, Black people are 3 times more likely to show up as a perpetrator than as a police officer in the news. Now, the opposite is true of whites. They're twice as likely to show up as officers than as perpetrators. Importantly, it's something we advanced called the interreality comparison. Now, the interreality comparison takes what the news is doing and says, is this true or not? Remember that idea about cultivation, that the media is telling you a different reality? So that's a test of cultivation. Like, is there something really true about the news, or is it distorting this picture? Interreality comparisons tell us that. So when we actually look at the proportion of Black perpetrators in the news and compare it to actual crime reports, we find that Blacks are actually overrepresented as perpetrators in the news compared to those crime reports. Okay? Especially violent crimes or felony crimes or what have you. Now, this is something that will be useful to think about that I'm sure many of you are probably asking. Why does this happen? Why does this happen? Right? What is the process by which this happens? I have 2 explanations I want to talk about tonight. The first one is called ethnic blame discourse. It was originally advanced by a guy named Van Dyke, and then a guy named Dan Romer out of University of Pennsylvania began talking about it quite a bit, and he applied it here, and I've basically used this as part of the explanation, but it's only part, and I'll show you why in a moment. What is this? This has to do with the fact that one of the reasons why you're here, which is when you have all white reporters, they engage in what we call ethnocentric dialogue with one another. Okay, same cultural background. They're the only ones in the newsroom. They're going to talk to each other and say, why is there crime? Oh, it's because of all those Black people. Why is there an immigration problem? It's because of all them Latino people. Why are there problems with these various issues of terrorism? Oh, it's the Muslim people. That's that problem, right? So an ethnocentric discourse begins to take hold of those who are in the news agency, right? It's a really, really powerful idea. It's one of the reasons why there was a Kerner Commission and other kinds of movements to try to diversify our newsrooms, because it's really easy for ethnocentric thinking to creep in. That doesn't explain everything, though, okay? The other explanation is what I call structural limitations in economic interest. So what is the news really trying to do? The news is about profit. Now, just really quick, how do you make a profit? What is profit? Is something has to go up, something has to go down. So if I'm gonna make a profit, what has to be really high, sky high? Viewers. What do viewers get me? Starts with an R. Ratings, another R. Revenue. Yes, you got it. Those are all those things that need to be up. My ratings, my viewers, my revenue. That's what I'm trying to get up. What am I trying to get down? My costs, right? It's the difference between cost and revenue is profit. Okay? So you're trying to cut costs while raising those revenues. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell stories that are going to get me eyeballs, right? And I'm from LA. I don't know if y'all have this here, but in LA, it's a thing. But we have the helicopters. Okay? So never forget, I was given a presentation once in front of some news executives, and we were having a conversation about, distortion, what have you. And one of the news producers told me this interesting story. He says, yeah, a lot of stuff you're talking about is true. And I remember one day we did have one of those stories where we were following somebody in the helicopter. It's a police chase. These have no news value. The reason why they do it is because of ratings. People watch. He said, I told the control room, let's step away. Let's not do the chase. We're not getting anything out of the chase. He said, we lost the ratings war that month. Okay. People want to see these kinds of things. So if I tell you a story about a blue collar crime, if I tell you, there's a person who walked into a convention center and shot 10 people and that kind of crime, everybody can relate to it. It's interpersonal violence. Everybody immediately says, wow, what would I do in that kind of situation? Would I be able to duck under the table? Would I be able to tackle the guy? Do I have a gun? Am I strapped? Would I take him out? What would I do? You start imagining all of the different scenarios, and it keeps you engaged. That's what's going on, right? In terms of those kinds of stories with very little news value. That's one of the reasons why they do it. Now, here's the thing. If you're poor, you're more likely to do crimes like that. Robbery, murder, what have you. But guess what? It's another set of crimes out there. They're called white-collar crimes. Okay? Now, to commit a white-collar crime, you got to be basically rich and or well-connected, right? And who is that, by and large? White people. Now, you might be thinking right now, some of you might be thinking, white-collar crime isn't as bad as blue-collar crime, right? I mean, right? No one's thinking that. All of you are like, no, white-collar crime that's a real crime, right? You're very well positioned to think that way. Because if you're committing white-collar crime, like I just said murder, right? Somebody come in and kill 10 people. But for lots of years, the tobacco industry knowingly gave people cigarettes that they knew would kill people in the thousands and millions. Okay? Sometimes they're Johnson & Johnson trying to change their name, right? Because some of their products have harmed other people. Some people have built people out of money and retirement. They call them Ponzi schemes. So I don't have time, but I usually tell a story about I have an ex-girlfriend who engaged in a Ponzi scheme, which was really unusual because most Black people don't do that, but she did. She booked all her friends from church and everything out of like a lot of money. So typically it's something a white guy does, right? But she did it. All right. I made a good choice to dump her when I did, didn't I? right? So what do you do in news? You ignore white collar crime. Why do you ignore it? Because, you know, those are your advertisers. I got to make money. You're not going to talk about that. You're going to talk about these interpersonal kinds of crimes that Black people are more likely to engage in. And then there are other communities that are harder to cover, like Latino communities. You don't even cover those communities. Okay. So let's talk about, I want to talk about two studies really quick, talk about SimSim, and then I'm going to be done. How much time do I have? 10? Thank you. We can do it. It's all good. I want to talk about the more recent example of this, right? So the earlier study was from the 2000s. I did another study, did something else, right? Looked more at a new context, looking at the Black family. So I want to specifically talk on that because I think that was advertised that I would, and I want to make sure I do it. Okay. So we looked at a lot of media, ideological, mainstream media, ABC World News, the cable networks, CNN, MSNBC. We looked at online sources, Breitbart, and we also looked at conservative websites as well. And we had a pretty large sample, about 830 stories for human content analysis, right? And we studied various things like the race of people, like Black versus white versus not neither one of those, poverty and welfare use, father involvement, absenteeism. I think you're going to finding interesting, and then the criminal involvement of family members. Right? And then we wanted to compare that to other crimes and activities that are tracked by the US government. So let me show you some data from this. This is the most data I'm going to show you, and hopefully it doesn't, it's not too much, right? So here's what happened. Oops. Now everything wants to work. All right. Talk about poverty, right? So this is Black people here, right? So on television, 59% of the families that are poor are Black, right? 17% of the poor families are white, right? But if you actually look at the data, according to the census, only 24% of poor families are Black, but 66% of poor families are white. It's overrepresentation. This one's interesting, okay? This is the Unavailable Fathers one. Now, here's the thing that is really fascinating. In the Black community, and I have friends like this, I have friends on both sides of this equation, okay? But in the Black community, there are times when families separate and there are divorces that occur and separations that occur. But the CDC asked an interesting question. They said, we want to know about actual father involvement, regardless if the parents are together or not. Represented as things like, does the father show up and like feed them food, take them to school, drive them to activities, show up to games, all of those kinds of questions. So they asked a large group of fathers, hey, what are you doing every day with your kids versus not, okay? And what you find when you ask that question is that you can actually figure out what percentage of fathers are not doing anything and are truly uninvolved. So about 25% of Black fathers are truly uninvolved with their kids. We don't see them, they're nowhere around. It's about the same for white fathers. About 29% of white fathers are not ever really around. But according to the news, 60% of Black fathers are involved, but only 20% of white fathers. Similarly, that's the biggest thing, but similarly, in terms of just picturing kids with parents, you find Black moms and white fathers are pictured with their kids at exactly the same rate. You know who's missing? Black fathers. Last one here, criminals, right? And this replicates what we found before. 37% of a family member being associated with crime in the news, 26% in news reports, but it's kind of flipped around, right? When you look at whites in terms of what should be versus what they report. What does that leave us with? Bill O'Reilly. If I had time, I'd play him, right? Black fathers, Black families are presented as poor, welfare dependent people, overrepresentation. Black fathers just as involved as white fathers, right? But misrepresented as uninvolved. That's a myth. Black family members overrepresented as criminals. And this really creates this view of Black families as socially unstable. Now, what I want to let you know is that this has major implications for effects. Okay, so I'm going to quickly summarize the survey. If there are any social scientists in the room, I was good. I did everything I was supposed to do, but I'm not going to report it right now. Okay, all right. But I'm going to explain this. We actually were able to take some of that news, those news studies earlier that we had done, and actually try to predict, if you will, your conceptions of various racialized ideas. Okay, so there's some news outlets that are better than others. If you watch Channel 4, or let me say it, NBC, in California, in Los Angeles, you're seeing a lot of horrible depictions. If you watch, on the other hand, the CW, it's much better. So for those who watch those really problematic stations for their news, they came away with this idea that Black people are violent. If you pay attention to crime news, right, you're going to just be more concerned about crime. And in addition, if you're concerned about, if you pay a lot of attention to crime news, and I give you a scenario and I tell you, hey, there's this little boy and he went out and he shot somebody, or hurt somebody, but he's only a teenager. Do you think he has a second chance? In other words, is he incorrigible? Can you make him a better person even though he did something bad? If I tell you that little boy is white, little boy is Black, and you watched and paid attention to crime news, you're going to be like, throw away the key. There's no hope for him. Similarly, if I don't tell you his race, you're going to say, throw away the key. There's no hope for him. You know why? Do you know why you're doing that? Assuming he's Black. Okay? But if I say he's white, you're like, oh, give him another chance. He can make it. Kyle Rittenhouse, anybody? Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Right? All right. My theory, and this is what I'll leave you with. Two propositions. First one, it's a little bit different now with new media, right? So there are these dominant themes that show up. They're viral. They show up in new media and in traditional media, right? And it does make stereotypes more accessible, but they are shaped by what diet you have, like who you follow and what kind of algorithm you have. So we have to pay attention to that algorithm and who you're following. The second idea that drives this theory is that social utility moderates the effects. What do I mean by social utility? Some of the things you all are really talking about in this room: togetherness, where you are in the social role that you have, and or trying to create an idea about community, right? So you, in other words, and let's say it another way, you post something, right? You post this really nice picture, it's maybe hair's done or whatever, you redid your makeup or whatever you did, right? You want some likes, don't you? Don't you want some, be honest, you want some likes. Raise your hand if you want some likes off of that nice new picture, right? That's social utility, right? You want that feedback from community that's gonna say, girl, you look good in that little photo you did. All right now, you want that, right? That's part of the deal, right? So we have to pay attention to that, because then you're gonna also select things where that community reinforcement is gonna be there. It's called selective exposure. So that leaves us with three groups. First group, unconscious bias group. This group will look much more like traditional media consumers. That is, the big viral things are going to tend to look like traditional media. And unfortunately, that means it's going to look a lot like what I've already showed you in terms of effects and patterns. Okay. So those are the cat people. That's why the cat's up there, right? It's really looking for the cat, but the viral stuff is still anti-Black. And so that gets you caught up on that little road of not really thinking critically. There's also the stereotype confirmers group. Now, this group uses social media in order to advance their own social identity that they feel is under threat, and they blame on outgroup members. These are your Proud Boys. These are your January 6 people. These are the people that attacked the Capitol. That's that group. You have to be aware of this group. It's a very serious group. It's one of the reasons why they said critical race theory is bad. That's that group right there. The last one is the anti-stereotype activist group. I think this is the group that you're most interested in. This group will see their role as utilizing digital media tools to break down stereotypes, Black Lives Matter, and other activist orientation online. Okay. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to just tell you really quick because I'm almost out of time. We found support for some of this stuff. Okay, we've started testing it. We're trying to work on right now. I'm at the point where I'm trying to publish this and move it forward as an academic. But the quick version of this that I want to tell you on this slide is we found support. We think we're onto something here for both the anti-stereotype and activist groups support, as well as the unconscious bias group support. We have some data. What I want to end with is that this model really does diagnose our current problem, but some solutions for our future. Media literacy and activism offer us some level of resistance, okay? So we have to really think about how do we utilize those tools to move us forward, okay? How can we expand the role of the anti-stereotype group? That is where we are. That is what we need to be focused on. And that's what we need to hone. And so I want you to really ponder those opportunities, those challenges. It's not easy. There's pushback. We were talking about this. The elder told me last night, he has me way more positive today than I was yesterday. I'm so glad I had dinner with him last night because he was like, yeah, we got to keep it moving. And yes, our enemy is a mess, but we got to keep it moving. And that is exactly what I want to end with. So any questions for me or reflections? That's really the end of my talk. But I hope I'm not too far over time because I'm trying to really be where you want me to be. Thank you. Yeah, please put a mic so everybody can hear the wisdom, please.
It's the new flush of images of Black people, in middle class roles and playing with their children, basketball rack, being what could pass for normal white people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
What you saying? What do you make of that? What is behind it?
So for a long time, a very long time, decades, to be honest with you, I got colleagues in so it's not my area of specialty, but I'll tell you what I know about it. For decades, my colleagues who work in this area of advertising and entertainment have been trying to get corporate America to understand that Black people like seeing themselves in the media. And if you affiliate yourself with Black people in this positive way, that will drive a more positive view of your product and they will actually buy it more, right? Now, the advertisers had two problems. One, they forget about us as a market. It's really weird. A lot of times they don't think that we're a market force that should be contended with, which is silly. It's ignorant. It's not based in reality, but that's one of the reasons why. So that's one. And then the second thing is that they have been historically concerned that if they show a Black face on these commercials, that white people would get turned off. So I have a colleague named Asay Apia at the Ohio State University, and a lot of his research shows that you can diversify the images in the commercial and it won't turn off white people. And that's why you're seeing it more, okay? One of the things, though, that they still don't do quite as much, and you may have noticed this, is they have a thing against Black love. I love all this, when you were talking about with your husband, you and your fiance, right? And they were like, why is it not two Black people in love doing stuff? Because there are these couples that are white. Now notice what they're doing now. They're making them nothing against this, but biracial, right? They'll have like a white man with a white Black woman, or a Black man with a white woman occasionally, but much more rare, right? They'll do that, but they won't show Black love. It's a thing, and that's another finding. That's not my work. I'm always going to cite things when it's not mine. That's Bob Entman. Bob Entman's talked about that for some time. Yeah.
All right, okay. Many comments, but I'm gonna keep it to one because there's many people here. my area is data, so I'm all about data and I'm all about predictive modeling. So my interest is more along that line because what I kind of when I see what you present, and I know you probably do much more than what you're presenting,
Yeah.
is like a descriptive analysis.
Yes.
So I'm wondering about focus groups, any kind of thing where you take what you think is a solution and do. Let me read what I wrote. Any modeling focus groups when shown a different mix, and does their perspective change, and over what time period? Is it temporary or permanent? Because you
Good
got this
question.
notion when you were the exception, maybe you get a
Yeah.
temporary note, but then you get back to the, like Black Lives Matter maybe yesterday
Mhm.
for many people, not people in this room, but for many people, that kind of thing.
I'll tell you what the theory says, and I'll tell you that you're touching on I love this question. You're touching on like my future. So I love that. That's the other thing. And this is what the elder also reminded me of. Like, okay, all the stuff I want to do the next 10 years of my life is all about debiasing. It's really about trying to find all the things that will break these stereotypes down. So let me tell you what we think theoretically, because I don't have data yet on that. So you asked about data. I have all the data on the bad effects. I have all the data. I have probably 6 more experiments that I didn't show you tonight. I have 2 or 3 more surveys I didn't show you tonight that are going the other way. That's data driven. And I didn't show you all the numbers either for it because everybody, I wasn't trying to put everybody to sleep after that good food, I could have done that, do the professor thing, but all the data. So I didn't do that. The theory says that if you want to displace a stereotype, one of the ways in which you do that is through different level. There's 2 things: different levels of contact, making sure that the contact is what we call equated, confrontational, non-combative, or competitive contact, and some other things. And so there is a variation on an old theory that talks about mediated contact for that, but it's mainly been tested with the LGBTQ community, to be honest with you. It hasn't really been tested as extensively with Black people. And I'd love to do that in the future, but I haven't done it yet. So we do think contact works. Second thing, when you create the image, you can't be too extreme in how anti or counter stereotypical the image is. And it's because of something I'm sure you've heard before. A lot of prejudiced people will say this, talking to a prejudiced person. And you have this conversation, they're saying, oh, all the fill in the blanks, Black people, Mexican people, whoever, is all this way. And then you say, well, wait a second, there's such and such down the street, and he is totally not that way. And then what do they say? He's a what? Exception to the rule. So you have to have what we call moderate disconfirmers and a plethora of disconfirmers. Oh, you know what? I do have one study. There's one study in which this is some years back, what I did with a student, in which we did this. We tested a multitude of different kinds of images with regards to Black women and Latina women, particularly on magazines, right? And if you show a more diverse counter stereotypical imagery of Black women and Latina women, it does reduce stereotyping. We did find that in one of our studies. So there's some data for you on that. And I can share that too, the article, but that's my best answer. It's a great question.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. We have to cut the time because of the opportunity to have dialogue. I'm so sorry. Dr. Dixon, thank you. Thank you. I'm using both hands, but I'm clapping in my head. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Dixon. I certainly learned a great deal. Now it's time to introduce and bring up my dear friend, Hannah Dinku. She's going to come up and talk to you about the small group tabletop discussions, the vision that Brother Anura shared, that the professor had, that you would get to have